doing this stuff, which will be after the program's over. I'm really gonna do it again. I'm attending my own boot camp.
All good.
Yes, yeah. I'm gonna be tough on myself. I'm not laughing at you, Max. My son just got new sneakers and he's making me crack up.
All right. Guess we can get it kicked off here. What did we do yesterday? Talked a little bit about middleware. What did we do in the middleware on the back end? What's the most common use of a middleware in the back end? Validation, more authentication. Fabilia, you got it. Yeah. So we talk about our 3 A's, our authorization, our authentication, and then either our auditing or accounting. I've heard both be the 3 A's. So you guys will probably touch on this more in the security module, but authentication is proving you are who you say you are, right? That's logging in with the username and the password. Authorization is saying, all right, you've proved who you are. Are you allowed to be here? Are you allowed to actually create new customers? Are you allowed to edit these things or delete these things? And then accounting or auditing is saying, hey, do we have a trail of everything that you did? So if your account was hacked, we can undo everything that you did, or at least know what systems you had accessed. So those are the 3 A's of security. And I'm sure you'll touch on them in the security module. We did our query on the back end. Thank you, Shaw. Yeah, that was for search. And we talked a little bit about search on the front end versus search on the back end, and how when we're working with the database, most of the time we will want to do the search on the server or the database side. There are definitely some times that we want to do a search on the front end as well, especially if the front end already has all of that data because it happens to be displaying it. Sometimes it's actually faster to do a search on the front end than the back end. Anything else that we covered yesterday? any light bulb moments from yesterday, anything that you took away where you were like, oh, wow, I want to do that in my capstone. Any breakthrough moments, anything happen in the news that you have questions about, opening the floor up in general, or questions from yesterday's content or from the past 5 weeks worth of content or anything at all before we get to capstone. Okie doke. Today is all about kind of capstone office hours. I will not call on people unless we have dead air and no one has questions. So you don't need to present. This isn't an official capstone check-in. This isn't Jesse, reading down the name list and everyone showing what they've been working on. And I do want to remind everyone, this is not a competition, right? The whole beauty of the capstone is that different people have chosen to invest their time in different sections of the capstone. So you may look at someone's capstone and go, oh my God, that's gorgeous. I can't believe they designed all of that out. And it's like, well, they didn't. They may have used a template because they wanted to focus their time on other aspects of the design or the implementation of their capstone. When I am hiring a full stack developer, I am looking more for projects that they have worked on that incorporate a database, that incorporate some backend code. And I don't really care if their front end is pretty or not. Now, when I'm hiring a front end developer and designer, obviously I care a lot more about their front end and their design and their wireframes and their entire process than if I was hiring a full stack developer. So when you are seeing other people's capstones, just keep in mind that they may have chosen to focus their time somewhere else, or they may have been able to invest more time into the capstone, which is completely fine. Yes, and to Karen's point, definitely celebrate how far you've come. I don't think anyone at the beginning of the program would have thought, oh yeah, by the end of this program, I would have been able to make this, right? So you want to celebrate all of that progress. So with that said, I'm going to open up the floor. A little hard to do one-on-one through chat, so I'm going to ask that you guys unmute your microphones and jump in and start asking some questions. And if there's anything you would like me to recover, especially from the past week, because we were moving so fast, I'm happy to either take questions about your capstone or things you would like me to kind of just talk through another time.
I can kick us off unless somebody else was. No,
go for it.
Okay. I actually have a list of questions. I'm just going to ask you a couple now and then basically I'm going to share my screen. I have a bunch of kind of like basic questions because I was going through setting stuff up. So Postgres insists on staying on appliances. Do we know why that would happen? Am I doing something wrong? I keep going back to like closing out Beekeeper, going back and setting up the default and all of that, and it's just not working. And then at some point this happened where it was like my terminal just opened itself and did this.
So double clicking on any of the databases in the Postgres window will open up that SQL command where you can actually run like select statements right on the database that you double clicked on. So you could do like select star from cart and semicolon and hit enter, and the table would pop up in there.
In the terminal, you're saying?
In the terminal, if you wanted to just like run a quick SQL statement without having to open Beekeeper. So you can close that without any effects. It's not like it's going to stop the server or anything. And then if you just double clicked on any of those databases, it would pop the terminal back up. So you don't have to do that.
Okay.
Based off of your server.js, I see you pulling in the PG client, and I see that you are connecting to the right database. So are you finding that when you run your code, it's running in the appliances database?
I keep going back over to this one, and then like I minimize it because I want the space. And I keep getting an error message. Like I was trying to run stuff in Postman, which I said I'd ask you about later, but it would not go through. And I'm wondering if it's because this keeps popping back over. You see how it just popped back over? Like, I don't know.
That's fine. Whatever database is selected there, it doesn't really matter. It is
Oh.
running all of those databases in the one Postgres server.
Can I turn the other one off, or do I not need to worry about it?
You could delete it, but you can't just disable it.
Okay.
So if you wanted to delete it, you could run a SQL command to delete it. But it's not a problem. The one that happens to be selected is always just the first one. And because appliances starts with an A, it's going to show that as selected. But all of those databases are actually running on the one Postgres server.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
So I wouldn't worry about anything in there as long as the running is green, or the start button is grayed out, you're good to go.
Okay.
So I think, yep, you've got the green running check and you're good to go there. So let's figure out what's going on here. Is your server running?
I think I started no, I didn't. Did I? I did not. Sorry.
Insert, is your refrigerator running? Well, then you better go catch it joke here.
All right, folks, I tried to be prepared. This one should be, yeah, this one, I know I have to just do my imports on it. Okay, so do you want me to press send again so we can see this lovely?
So it 404'd in Postman.
Yeah.
Which is usually not found. So let's go to our backend code. And I'm guessing you meant to post to that /customers endpoint.
Yes, that was another question I had because I kept having issues. So this is what I remembered us doing, but I may have the endpoint wrong. I may have the route wrong.
So go ahead and copy this whole part.
With the backticks?
Without the backticks.
Okay.
And then go back over to Postman and drop that in there. Yep. And then send. Okay, now we got your app crashed. So different errors, we're celebrating different errors. Yay, we fixed one problem. All right, so let's figure out what's going on up there. Go ahead and scroll up. And keep going. And this is unterminated quote or string near your name.
Yeah, I tried to escape that. And I mean, I can just do this, but I still got an error.
Go ahead and hit send on that, and let's see what the other error is.
Do I need to Control C and do it again?
Yes, you do. Okay, let's see if we have a different error now. So I am guessing that go down to your values in your code, scroll down on line 35, 36 area.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what I believe is happening is all of those template literals need quotes on either side of them, because
I had them in and it kept giving me an error. I tried it with backticks, which is what we did. And then singles, and I didn't do double quotes just because I thought, I mean, I can go through and do them again, but
Try, so what we can do is let me grab control from you.
okay.
And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take your whole template literal, and
Mhm.
sometimes I find this helpful. If we were using Sequelize, this would probably be a little bit easier because we aren't constructing like a raw SQL query. But
Okay.
if I save that and then come in and make my request, now when I come over here, I'm able to see the raw SQL that it's generating out for me.
Mhm.
And sometimes when we take that and we shove that over in Beekeeper, it will actually be a better error message or a more helpful error message.
Oh,
So I'm going to go over to the query. I'm going to paste that in, and I'm just going to hit run. And we're going to get a syntax error here. And you notice it's the first space that it is hitting that syntax error. So I'm going to try putting this in quotes and running it. And now we are hitting a different
oh, it
error.
doesn't like the spaces. Okay.
Exactly. So
And I
if
went
we,
through and did that. I'm sorry to keep cutting you off. It's just I was working on it all day. And I actually just set it back to where I was because I was kind of like, this is kind of how I want to do it. But when I did like the 44 on target lane, I condensed it because I was like, I think it's the spaces, but then it kept going back to it. So then I was like, just like shortening it because I thought maybe it was too long. Does that make sense?
yeah, you're not over 255 characters. So let's see, you're inserting into the customers table. So if we take a look at customers, you've got all of these set to text. They should probably be varchars, because text is an unlimited character length.
Mhm.
And unlimited character lengths are much harder to do in the database than a varchar is.
Oh, okay.
It's much less intense on the database to do a varchar. But
So
let's
that's just
just
an alter table to get those to that.
correct. Yes.
Now I had some of these should have been I wanted them to be strings, and Beekeeper would not accept strings from me for anything.
So
That's why I did
Beekeeper, it will be a varchar because
Oh,
varchar is what Postgres uses. The
okay.
only time we would call it a string is if we were using Sequelize.
Okay. And you did tell us that. I'm sorry. Thank
All
you.
good. Okay, so now I put quotes in everywhere except on the now because that's going in for our timestamp.
Mhm.
And now it is telling me a column doesn't exist, and that I think is because we need to use, is it backticks here? I can never remember.
I thought it was double quotes, but I could be wrong.
Let me look that up because I always struggle with remembering what it is. Double quotes are for names of tables or fields. Sometimes you can omit them. The single quotes are for string constants. This is the SQL standard. So I'm wondering if these were actually supposed to be single quotes, but I think you're right. These are supposed to be double quotes.
I'm sorry. I learned like a lesson in brevity doing these column names. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and
I was
that's
trying to be clear, and I was like, maybe I should just scale it back.
the benefit of using Sequelize is that
Mhm.
you're kind of telling Sequelize what columns to expect. And so because of that, it does a lot of magic in building the query for you. And while that feels like cheating, I've never worked on a project that used a database that did not use an ORM.
Okay.
Nope, still the same problem. All right, we're gonna cheat now because I'm getting lazy. We're gonna copy this. We're gonna make a new file over here, and we're gonna paste. And we're just gonna do a quick find any single quotes and replace them with, or other way around. Find any double quotes and replace them with a single quote.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we're gonna go back to, nope, beekeeper. And paste in on top of this. Oh, darn it, Max. Just move this over so I can switch. It would help if I hit the right command keys, Command V. Command V, there we go. Insert has more target columns than expressions. Okay, we're getting somewhere. What
Yeah.
it is saying is that the number of columns here does not match the number of inserts that we're doing down here.
Okay.
So
Something.
there is something that's not lining up, but I think that once you get that figured out, oh, like maybe it's something as simple as this is supposed, oh no.
No, because that's just one item. That should be the first name.
Yeah.
I can go through it so somebody else can go. If you want me to, I can check.
Phone number, shipping address, city, state. We're missing state.
Oh, look at you with your hawk eyes.
Yay.
Yes.
Okay, so if we go into our customers table and now double click on it, your name is finally shown up.
Okay, so does that fix the other issue?
It won't fix it in the code, but you basically just have to know that single quotes for any of the database values, and they should go around all of these, each row. Before the comma and before the $sign, put single quotes in there, and then all of our column names should be double quoted up here.
Okay. Double quotes. Okay.
And so I would try putting them back in and then loop back and ask questions if you're still getting stuck there.
Okay, thank you so much, Max. I appreciate it.
So the very long answer to all of that is we always double quote our column names and our table names, but when we are inserting values, we use single quotes.
Okay.
That is a differentiator that I always forget. So good question and a good review on that. And I'm sure if I were writing SQL every day, that's something that would stick in my mind. But because I use the ORM so much, that's not something that jumps out. All right, who's up next?
Hi, Max. Can I share my screen?
Go for it.
Thank you. So, all right. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Perfect. So I was able to complete the setup for Grid Mail.
Okay.
I was able to actually send an email, not from the server. We created this email test.js just to test the email.
Okay.
So like if I,
and I don't think you're going to, but just a heads up, because we're live on YouTube, make sure that you do not open that .env file that has your API key on it.
exactly.
We do not want to show that on screen.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's why I was called. Why am I? It's very slow.
When you're screen sharing, sometimes it slows
Oh,
down
I
a little
see.
bit.
So it says message sent successfully. So if I refresh, probably I should get an email. Yes, you just got this email. So this setup is done. The only thing left is the domain names authentication, where When I click on this, it says receive from something. Oh, where? Oh, I think click save. So I can set that up, domain name. So all I need is to get the password and that stuff. That's easy. But this is not the actual production server. So do I need, oh, I have API key here. Anyway, do I need dependencies? So I have installed Express body parser, the app that is required by SendGrid.
Yep.
And one more. Anything else I need to do specifically on a structure-wise? I mean, I have node this environment. I have the there was another file that skips GitHub. So I have that. Anything else on the structure-wise, or how to structure them or place?
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track. It's awesome that you have the email test file working. Now it's just a matter of moving that email test into an endpoint. And it looks like you have that endpoint already largely set up. So what you would do is I would call that endpoint something like app.post /email, right? Or send email maybe. And then you would want to modify your HTML there to include some of the form fields coming through from the front end request. And that would probably be in the body.
All right.
So basically kind of 3 steps to go from here. One, you want to make it, let me just, can you pop open your contact us, open the form? Yeah, so in here, you already have that action wired up to do a /send email. What you probably want to do is specify what server that send email is going to be on. So do like a HTTP : and for right now, localhost : and then 4000, because that's where your backend server is running.
Here in the action?
Yep.
After email?
Before the slash, that's where you want to put in your HTTP, yep, localhost 4000. And throw the HTTP in the front of it, : / just so it knows. And then save that. And then go to your server.js and make your app.post, instead of it just happening at /, make it at send email. And that that should be in quotes. And then I think you need a / instead of that @ sign at the beginning. So let's throw a, before your message, let's throw a console log rec.body. And then save that and start up your npx nodemon server.js. And we actually want to be in the contact us page, right? Because we're trying to wire up our on the actual HTML, the other contact us tab. In the browser.
Oh, in the browser, okay. Localhost /
Okay, sorry, let me be a little bit more clear. What we're trying to do right now is make it so your contact form in the HTML is able to use the endpoint that you just created in your backend server to actually send the email based off of the data in the form. So if you go to the Contact Us tab in Chrome and actually fill out that form and hit submit, in theory, it should send an email for you. So so I think the problem is, you see that warning that it says API key does not start with SG period.
Mhm.
I think that's because you have your API key properly configured in email test.js, but not in server.js.
Oh, okay. I think I did, but maybe let me double check a quote or maybe missing.
Yeah, I would check just to make sure that if you go to email test.js, because I know that that's pulling in from the env file. Oh no, it's not. All right, I will blur that part of the video just so your API key doesn't leak.
And you can change the API key once you create it. Yeah.
So if you just scroll up and copy that SG set API key and the API key itself and paste that into server.js, I'm thinking that that's our problem. Yeah, if you just paste the API key in there and then change the variable on line 7 to be referencing the API key.
Set key const.
So that would just be API key in all
API
caps with the, yep, and then move your line 7 to below line 9. Okay, and now if you start your server, let's see what happens. Okay, so we're not getting that message anymore. Try and hit the submit button on your Contact Us form. And nothing. Okay. Above your console log slash here, let me just gonna see if we can just throw a console log in here that says test, and then I notice you're not res.sending anything back from this, so I'm gonna just do a res.send email sent, just so something is coming back. And so now if we submit the form, fresh submit. So we've got the send email is not defined happening in line 67. So it's trying to do this on click, and that on click is preventing it from working. So did you have that defined somewhere? Or was that kind of just a placeholder?
This is more of a placeholder. This was with a different function. I don't think we need it here.
Okay, so I'm just gonna take that out and I'll move it to a comment just so we have it. Oh, cut.
Thank you.
Okay, so now if we hit submit, you don't get any error because type should be submit, which will actually make that button submit the form. So we're going to refresh, and now we're going to hit submit. Now we get our email sent, and if you notice, now it's showing up over here.
Perfect.
So the thing that I would say, there is a way to access the form data.
Mhm.
And I know you can use body parser for it. The thing that I would, before you go too far down that though,
Mhm.
you notice that when we hit the submit button, it took us away from the page and it
Mhm.
made it happen. It took us from our front end server, which you have on 5501, and
Mhm.
took us to our back end server. And so the better approach for this is probably, instead of making it do an action that's linked up to your backend, instead creating an on submit function and then using fetch inside of that.
Okay.
So that would be my next step, would be removing both the method and the action and then changing it to use a fetch instead of the native form event. And if you do that, that will give you more control to be able to make that call to the backend
Mhm.
without having to redirect to this send email.
Okay. Thank you. I can try that. I will try that.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much.
So just to give everyone a little bit more context on that, Shaw had a contact form on his webpage that he wanted to send an email out. But the problem is when you're working on the front end, your front end can't send an email without the help of a backend server. So there is a little cheat you can use. It's a website called mailthis.to. And they will actually provide a way that you can create a contact form on your website without having to create your own backend server. With that said, it's a very common request for web apps that web apps are able to send emails. Think about every time you hit the forget password, right? That's happening on the back end to generate out an email that's going to let you reset your password. Or you may get some notification, right? Hey, someone left a comment on a post that you have on your website, or there are a lot of times that you will need your backend to send an email. So there are services, lots of them out there: Mailgun, SendGrid, AWS has one called SES, Simple Email Service, I believe. But lots of different ones that will let you send emails. I happen to use SendGrid, and I believe they have a free tier. And so you can use SendGrid in your backend to send an email right through your backend API without having to configure an email server and go through SMTP and all of that fun stuff. So that's a very common use case that Shaw is going through. Of all right, instead of just cheating and using mailthis.to, sometimes it's good exposure to go through and use SendGrid directly. Other questions? Don't test me. I'll open a code editor and just start talking. And a reminder, if you're going through thinking through the last week of all the random topics we covered, if there were any topics that felt a little fast to you, or you would like just another explanation or an example of how I would do something, even if it's not something we've done in the past couple of weeks, I'm happy to spend that time to do this now. The point that you should kind of be at in the program, short of deploying and security, is thinking about if a client came to you and asked you to build a web app that could do something, hypothetically, let's just call it X, that you would be able to at least start thinking together of all the different pieces that it would take to pull off that project, right? So starting to think about, okay, we've got to do all of our planning. We've got to get requirements figured out. We have to design out our ERD. We're going to figure out what screens we need. We're going to wireframe. We're going to do our mock-ups. Okay, everything is planned out. What's the next step? Okay, well, we need to do project setup. We probably need a front end. We probably need a back end. We probably need a database. Let's go through, use NPM, use Create React App. Let's get all of that set up. Okay, still project setup, but we've got to get probably SQLize working. We have to start loading up our tables in our ERD. Okay, we've got that all figured out. All right, now we go to our front end and we start coding out all of the prep work, all the planning that we did with our wireframes and our mockups. And then, oh, all of that needs to be wired up. So let's put our endpoints. So our endpoints are using our models from SQLize and doing that in the front end. And I know that sounds like a lot of steps, but think about how much that's covering. You can build an app that pretty much does anything, especially an app based around information, which most apps are, with that data, with that flow, with that process. And so just breaking it down into those small steps, you can really pull off any project. So if there is a project where you're like, man, I would love to know how to do this, but I can't even think, where to start on that, I'm also happy to kind of talk through that.
Max, I have a question about the databases.
Yep.
So you know about the process. So what would be some of consideration on how to decide where to host your database? Let's say you have a business case and you end up using Postgres for your database. So how do you do it in cloud? If cloud, what are consideration? And also when you decide, let's say you use Amazon or IBM or any others, so do you design it in a way where it's efficient, where you don't make a lot of traffic back and forth, or how do you structure your queries that you don't, pay a lot of, I should say?
Yeah, so two different considerations when you're deploying a database. You can either deploy them where you manage them yourself, or they are managed for you. So there are at work we have we manage all of our servers ourselves. So we say, all right, we want a server that's got 1 CPU and has 3 gig of RAM in it, and they hand it to us and they say, we installed Ubuntu for you, or some server variation, go. And we have to use that SSH terminal to set everything up. So we start going in and we start setting up our web hosting to make sure our files work. And then we set up our backend server and make sure Node is up and running. And then we install Postgres and make sure that Postgres can connect into our Node. We do all of that from SSH from the terminal. The problem is that doesn't scale particularly well. You can continue to make your server bigger, but now all of a sudden, when you need to scale out your database and have multiple servers connecting into one database server, that becomes a little bit more complicated. So that's when the managed solutions become a lot more attractive, where you can just go to Google Cloud Platform and say, I need a Postgres database. Here is the name of the database, and I want you to take care of everything for me. If the database server runs out of hard drive space, I want you to add more hard drive space. If you're realizing that there are too many connections happening on the database at the same time, I want you to upgrade the bandwidth. If you are realizing that queries are taking too long to run, I want you to add more CPUs to my server. And so that is the benefit of a managed database, is that Google or Amazon is able to scale up your database for you. Now, that is more expensive, especially on small projects when you're talking about, let's say, roughly under 500 users. If you have under 500 users, there's pretty much it would take you to do something drastically wrong to be running into database performance issues with 500 users. With that said, I'm sure someone could raise their hand and say, but I work with data sets that are, 100 gigabytes big, and I'm running these complex queries on it. It's like, yeah, okay, but that's probably an edge case. For a standard web application, you're talking about small amounts of data that you're storing. You're talking about relatively simple queries that you're running, even if they have multiple joins on them. The database is going to be able to support that just fine. So you could be talking about a server that only costs $20 or $30 a month, compared to managed hosting, which could start at $30 a month for the database alone. So that those managed hosting solutions are really built for when you need to scale up your project very quickly. And managed hosting exists not just for databases. You can also get managed web hosting or backend hosting, where they are going to manage all of that scale for you. So the lesson that we learned at work is those managed solutions are great, and you gladly pay for them when you are running into performance issues, and Google can manage that for you. The problem is that they don't scale down very well. So if you're making an app that only has 25 users, you're now paying roughly $100, $150 a month for Google to be able to do all of that scaling for you. But when you only have 25 users, you don't want any of that scaling. You just want your build to be smaller. And so that is largely the case with AWS and with Google and with Azure and all of those services. Managed services are great, but you want to be careful about when you're using them, and making sure you understand the scale of an application. Nathan will be coming in. I think DevOps is the module after the next one, but it could be the next one. Can't remember. But he's going to cover, how do you get a server set up? How do you deploy it? How do you manage your SSH and go through all of that configuration, all of that kind of fun stuff. So I think that's a great question, Shaw. I hope I answered some parts of the question. But after the DevOps module, hopefully it will be a little bit more clear of how do you deploy something like this? Should I use the managed solution? Should I kind of set it all up from scratch? And if you're still having questions at the end of that module, I would suggest asking that question again directly to Nathan. Other questions? Karen, was DevOps your favorite module from Cohort 1?
Probably not.
I think there were some lessons learned of.
Don't hold back. Tell us how you feel.
I think there are some lessons learned, just like we learned that, all right, we need to cover Mongo, but we don't need to be spending a week on Mongo and a week in Postgres. We really need to spend the majority of the time covering concepts in one, and then just give you a little taste of another one. And I think we may have done that in DevOps, of just, hey, we're going to show you how to deploy to 4 different clouds and use, all these different configuration files, and just like, whoa, that's a lot.
Yeah, I think it was after doing the 2 and you're like, okay, here's Postgres and now here's Mongo. And then it's like, oh, by the way, here's this that you can do with DevOps, and bam, in like 4 days. And it was like, what? Because I think it was like 1 a day we did. Boom, 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 boom. And yeah, that was probably not fun.
So as you guys have been going through the different modules, I think you've been picking up on like, oh man, this front end stuff's really cool. This server stuff, like, it works, but I don't like it. Or like, man, the database is great. If I could do this full time, I totally would. That is how DevOps was born, was okay, setting up servers is kind of a necessary evil of being a developer, because if you can't set up the servers, you can't have your code ever run. But the cloud and the explosion of the cloud made it so DevOps was a new field that got born, right? It kind of took half of being a developer and knowing how apps are set up, and half of being IT of setting up servers and knowing how they scale and managing IP addresses and DNS and all of that stuff, and kind of shoved them together and made DevOps, which is not quite a developer, but also not quite an IT person. And so the DevOps role was born out of that. And so we have a handoff tomorrow with Nathan, and I will make sure to plant the seed of, hey, let's think through like practical DevOps, right? Let's not throw all these technologies at you. Let's actually talk about how we would deploy an app. And the curriculum set up for that. So it's not like, any of that will be news to him, but DevOps is a field where I say I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough to pull off what I need to, but we are launching a product at the end of November that will be going live to customers. And right now at work, I literally send a message out in Slack and I say, no touchy. And everyone goes in and goes, all right, clear, 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 clear. And I hit the deploy button, and it takes 2 or 3 minutes, and it takes all of our servers offline. And then everything comes back and I go, all right, clear. And everyone, goes back to using the software. Well, 3 minutes of downtime doesn't sound like much, but when you have customers using your software, all day, you can't really say, hey, we're going to take your app offline, or our app offline. So that's when I will be putting out a job posting for DevOps within the next month, for saying, hey, look, our app's running, we're up and running with it internally. I'm not an expert at scaling servers. We need to make sure we're doing this right. And that's when the DevOps role comes in. Actually, our job posting for that should already be live on Indeed, because we're hiring a hybrid DevOps full stack developer. But yeah. Other questions?
So I'd like to get my API key hidden, like with that, what you're talking about, where you send a personal API key to the backend and then have the backend send the real one. So that's something I want to work on tonight. I've also been trying to think of what I could add for like a database to my project. I was wondering if I just had like count how many people had been to each site or something like that, or I don't know, like some kind of thing where they could leave comments or something. It doesn't really lend itself that well to a database, I don't think. So I'm kind of looking for some ideas.
One thing you could do is make it so every location would be a row in the database. So you could make it so, the location name would be a column, maybe the location like description or paragraph or more info, or, whatever you want to call it. You could store the path to the image in the database, or if you had multiple images per location, you could do that as kind of a one-to-many relationship, and fire that through SQLize and store, multiple photos for each location ID. You could store the path to the audio file that is going to play. Trying to think anything else for your app, but
there really isn't, like, you could just do that all in the actual web page, like the front end, right?
You could.
A way to make it into a database.
The benefit of doing it as a database is you start to think about your app being more reusable, right? Like, okay, we're doing this for downtown Syracuse, but what happens if Ithaca calls up and goes, oh, we would love to do a walking tour as well. Well, now going in and updating all of that HTML is going to be a lot trickier, as opposed to the database where we could just delete out the Syracuse rows and dump in the Ithaca rows and be off and running. The other way of thinking about it is, what if I want to allow people to set up their own walking tours from scratch? Well, we're going to need to create some admin interface that they can sign in and set all of that up. And then the end user is not going to know, hey, this is coming from an API call in the database, as opposed to it just being an HTML. But there's got to be some way that an admin would be able to go in, set up the walking tour, store all of that information in the database, and then have your front end be able to pull from it. So you don't need to go all the way down that content management system path of building out an entire admin interface, but setting up your front end just to pull that information from tables may be beneficial.
Okay, thanks.
And then for the API key, do you know where to start on that? Do you want a little example?
Sure. I mean, I'm thinking I need to set up a post endpoint and then send, I don't know, can I just invent anything I want for the API key and send that to the, would it be kind of like what we did with the user password last night? Or like it has to match the right thing and then that will like authorize it to send the real API key? Or
yeah, the API key between the front end and back end, like the one that you make up, is less important. The one that's more important is your actual API key that you're using, I think, for the speech to text. That is the important one that should be in the
it's
back
for
end.
Google Maps. Yeah, right now it's for Google Maps, but I may have a different one to add at some point for the.
I think the Google Maps one is actually designed to be okay to be exposed, because it's set up as a front end project. I'm pretty sure. Let's see.
It's just a general Google one. You can use it for maps or anything else. So. You had to enable which APIs you were going to use, and there were a ton of them on all different categories.
I would have to see. Okay, so they've got like a whole article on this. I'm going to share it in the Zoom chat just in case anyone else is interested. When you get an API key, especially if it's an API key tied to your credit card somewhere, chances are you want to protect that. You don't want that data to leak. However, there are times that you get an API key that are limited down to your specific website. There are times that you can get an API key where you say, the only website that should be able to use this API key is mydomainname.com. And at that point, it becomes safer to use that API key in your front end code. So because Google Maps is set up so that you can use your API key to display a map in your front end, all of the security practices lined out in that article are setting you up, I believe, I'm not saying this with confidence, but I believe they are saying, as long as you set all of this up, it is okay to put your API key on the front end. With that said, the majority of API keys you do want to make sure are only accessible on your backend and not public information.
Still, I think it would be a good thing to learn how to do. So.
Yeah. Yep. And that's completely fine. Yeah. Google Maps is as you know, Kyle, there's a lot behind Google Maps and there are a lot of different things you can do. And I wouldn't be surprised if Google Maps had like an API key that they allowed you to use for the front end, and then an API key where they're like, hey, be careful with this. Don't just throw it anywhere. This should be used over on the back end because there's a limit to like, you know, how many directions you can get through this API key or something like that. So
They had a
good-
video that like series of 3 videos that they show you or that you watch to figure out how to get everything set up. And one of the things had like a setting where you could choose how much you wanted to restrict it. So I think you might have to like choose the restrictions before you do something like that, like put it
yeah,
in a more publicly accessible
yeah.
place. So, and I may not have that set up yet. I'm not sure that I did any restrictions because I was just practicing. So
Yeah, and so for something like Shaw's case where he's sending emails, that is like the easy, don't publish that in your front end. Like that definitely has to be in your back end, because if you send more than so many emails, you're going to get charged. And so people start just pulling your API key and sending spam through your API key. The Google Maps one is a little bit more nuanced of an answer, because Google has so much security set up around that, because they know most people are going to be using their maps in the front end. But it would be, I agree with you, Kyle, it would be good practice to set that up. Other questions?
Max, this is Shah again.
Yep.
A question about, let's say in your website, you have a document, a PDF or any other documents, and you want to allow visitors, your client, to access them. So what's the best way of doing that? Do you store it in database?
Are these documents that are like getting uploaded by end users?
No, you upload it, but where they can click a link and access it.
Okay.
Or they can fill out the forms, and after they submit the form, they receive that.
Yeah, so the answer you probably, I will answer the question, but most time.
Sorry to interrupt. The reason I ask, is there a way, I'm thinking of a way to use databases for my backend, because we have learned that it will be nice to do that. When we started, I mean, honestly, I wasn't thinking that we'll be covering this much stuff and we'll be learning all of these stuff, this great stuff. So perhaps I was kind of naive that I didn't select some things, and also had some health issues. I wasn't sure about that. So anyway, thanks.
Yeah. So the ability for a user to upload a file is a thing that every time that I code out, I say it is 2021 and it still takes way too long to allow people to upload files. The reasoning behind that is it is complicated for the browser to show a file input, which you can use an input tag and say type equals file and put that in a form. But you need to deal with this concept called multi-part form data, which is another part of body parser that you can set up. On top of dealing with multi-part forms, which is basically the browser looking at your file and going, that's too big to send as one API call. So we're literally going to break up your file into multiple parts and then send them to the server, and it's going to be up to the server to reconstruct them all together. Once you get that file on your server, now you go, okay, now what? I know I'm not supposed to save files in my database, so I need to save that file somewhere on my server and then store a link to that file or the path to that file in my database. So if I need to reference it later, I can. Once you get that figured out, now you go, okay, well, what happens if a user uploads a file with the same exact file name? Well, it would overwrite that file. So I need to be careful and make sure that the file names I'm storing the files as are unique. And oftentimes you will use the ID number that gets generated in the database to keep track of all of those files. So the biggest example of this is probably profile images. How do I make it so a user can upload their profile image and have it be accessible? So that whole process is what you have to go through to just make that image be uploadable. But then you also have to deal with the flip side of that, of how do I make that image accessible? How do I make it so that image on my server can be passed through Express and actually sent out through my backend? So it's a very complicated topic. I could do an example on it, but it would probably be a good hour and a half to get that entire process flow set up. So allowing users to upload files is tricky. Allowing them to download files is a little bit easier. So going through the process of, hey, they create a form and they're going to fill out all these form fields, and then they can hit a generate button and have that pop out. That is somewhat of an easier process. You just have to start thinking about what is the data format is that file going to come out as, right? Generating PDFs or a Word document can be tricky to do on the back end. So I don't know what kind of file format, Shaw, you were thinking of, or if it was just going to be tied to a form. But the short answer to a very long meandering question is, it is very hard to deal with files both coming in and out of the server.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now, if you wanted to think about that as they fill out a form and they hit the save button or the generate button, and they just get taken to another page, and that page has the information laid out correctly in HTML, that might be a little bit easier of a task, and would still allow you to save the information coming in the form into the database, and then that page would show all the information in the database.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I will look at these. Yeah.
Cool. Other questions?
Hi, Max. I just had a quick question about SAS with React. I put SAS in my React and then it depreciated. And should I just avoid SAS altogether in React, or it recommended adding the Dart SAS to try to support it? I should do the Dart, or
No, you should probably do the node dash SAS, NODE dash SASS.
yes, it says it doesn't support it anymore.
I
It
think I
doesn't support
just
the
ran
current
into
environment.
this, and
Yeah.
if you install version 5 of Node SAS, it works fine.
It just doesn't support the 6. Is that
It
the
doesn't
the
support the
6.01?
6.
Okay.
Yeah. Dominique, if you pop open your package.json in your capstone and look for the node SAS line, can you tell me what version it says there? I just did a new project at work, and I just ran into that same thing. I think Create React app has not been updated to support Node SAS at version 6 yet. And so it's giving you a depreciation error, but really it's the reverse. It's not that it's depreciated, it just doesn't support the newer version yet. So I believe if you
Max, you said which folder in my capstone?
the package.json in your front end.
All right. Let's see. I'm looking for SAS and the package, right?
Yes.
Let me see.
Yeah, so Node SAS has been downloaded 2,680,000 times in the past 7 days. Version
Oh.
6 has only been downloaded 93,000 times. So there are a lot of packages that probably just this came out less than a month ago, 2 months ago. And so that's why a lot of them probably haven't updated to it. So what you would be able to run, and I'll send it in pasted code, is npm install node-sas at 5. And that will install the specific version of node SAS that happens to be version 5.0.0.
Okay, thank you.
That
How
should
long?
fix the problem.
Okay, and how long does it normally take for like compatibility issues like this to work themselves out? Does it just
Couple months.
at least a couple months? And then how would I update it, as this is a website I want to continue running? How do I just look to install it again, or?
Yeah, if you just run that npm I node-sas command again without the version number, it will always install the latest version. You can also run npm update, and that will update to the latest major version, but will not. So if your version number was like 1.2.3 and you ran npm update, it would update you to 1.3, but it would not update you to version 2.0. If that makes sense at all. It will do any patch updates for you and any minor updates for you, but it will not take you to a major version, because major versions tend to have breaking changes between version updates. So if you wanted to jump from Node SAS 5 to Node SAS 6, you would have to run that npm I node-sas without the version number, and then it would upgrade you to the latest major version.
Okay. I guess I just find it confusing because I've run my React with the newer version, until today. So.
Yeah, well, it's actually Create React App is using a version of SAS under the hood, but it's using the older one. And so when you npm installed node-sas, Create React App got really cranky and is like, no, you're trying to use a newer version of SAS than we use under the hood. That's going to confuse us. And so that's why they have that message pop up, and like you get a failed to compile, because it's like, whoa, we use SAS with React and you've confused us here. And so that's why you have to pin it at that certain version and say, just use version 5, and then all of a sudden it will work for you. I know it's a little complicated, but I'm familiar just because I ran into it, I want to say 2 days ago when I was creating a site at work. So if you run it at 5, it should solve your problems. Sorry, we lost you there. Did you say anything?
No, I'm all good. Thank you for the help.
Cool, no problem. Yeah, sometimes you're at the mercy of open source developers where you're like, this is so frustrating, it's not working. Before Create React App existed, I'm not kidding you, it took me 3 hours to set up a React project, because you had to configure Webpack, you had to configure Babel. I know there's a correct pronunciation and I've promptly forgotten it after looking it up 15 different times. But Webpack is basically what converts your JSX code into regular JavaScript code, among doing 50 other gazillion things that are just magic. Webpack, I believe, is also responsible for running the server on port 3000 or wherever you're running it. And Webpack is also responsible for making the build of React, so that you can actually take your build folder and upload it somewhere. Babel is something that is converting newer JavaScript features from ES6 and above back into ES5, which is what is widely supported on most browsers. It's a super popular project that is used in most front-end frameworks. I'm trying to SAS, I know, is part of Create React App, and there are a couple others as well. So Create React App really does a lot of magic for you, where if you go to set up a React project from scratch, it turns out that React doesn't work too well on its own. It has a lot of other open source projects that it relies on in order to actually pull off the magic of React. And that's why Create React App is so great, because it's installing a lot of the dependencies for you. Other questions?
Hey, Max, can I ask another question or two maybe?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
One is about Postgres and the other is about in servers. So, we have server that listen to port, let's say 4,000 or 3,000. Do you also provide a backup kind of where you say 3,000 and or 4,000 in case one is not available, so the other port is used, or that's not common? You don't do that.
I'm sure it is theoretically possible, but no, it is definitely not common. In general, you want to find a port that is not in use, and then make sure that your code is going to be running everywhere on that port. So it is, sometimes you would use a different port if you were doing local development as opposed to deploying it to a production server. So sometimes it is common to run servers on different ports based off of where that server is getting set up. But it is not very common to say, hey, run that on 3000, and if 3000 isn't available, try 3001, and if that isn't available, try 3002. And the reasoning behind that is because at some point when you deploy, you need to link up your domain name to your server that's actually running. And in order to do that, you need to map the domain name to the port number. And if that port number were just going to change based off of what other things were running on the server, it would be hard to kind of lock that in and say, hey, when I go to app.mydomain.com, I want you to pull up my front end. And when I go to api.mydomain.com, I want you to go use the backend server, which is running on a different port. And so that's why you want to figure out what port they are going to run on and be consistent with that, because the way you configure your domain name to line up to your actual server is by using those port numbers.
Thank you. The other question was about Postgres. The other was installing Postgres, and there were two options. One is EBD and the other one is app. I went with app because that's, I think, what we did in class. postgresapp.com or .app. I installed that, but what is the other option, EBD? Is it something that
the letters are EBD?
Yeah.
Stand by.
I think it may be more advanced version of it. I don't know.
Oh, I think yeah, so this is, I've never heard of Postgres EDB, but I also have not, I've never scaled a Postgres database past more than a couple hundred users. So they say the key features of Postgres EDB are increased security, enterprise-ready tools, Oracle compatibility, more deployment options, enhanced integration, enhanced DBA, database administration, and developer productivity, and then 24/7 support. So it looks like EDB, which stands for Enterprise DB, is a company that has added some additional functionality to Postgres to make Postgres scale better at the enterprise level. So I'm sure there was a price associated with using their version or their spin out of Postgres. But basically they provide services around Postgres to allow you to use your database at the enterprise level. Probably not something I would be worried about, considering that Google and several other companies all use Postgres and have not worried about it. It would more be, if your app took off and you're like, oh my God, I'm having all of these database issues. I want to just pay a company who is an expert in Postgres and they can help me work through those problems. That's when you would go to EDB and say, hey, can you help me with my Postgres database? I'm having all these performance issues, or I have a lot of users, or I need to start thinking more about my data security or anything like that.
Thank you.
And there are a lot of companies out there that use that pricing model of, hey, we're responsible for this open source code, but if something goes wrong or you need help, we have hourly consultants who can help you with that. And we also have a paid version of our open source code that you can take advantage of. Red Hat was the first company that I can think of that really does that. But there are lots of companies, both big and small, that support an open source project. But if you come in and say, hey, I need this specific feature in your open source project, they offer hourly services or some premium version of an open source software to support that. Come on, after having me teach for 5 weeks in a row, you guys don't have more full stack questions? I know you're sick of hearing my voice, but you just got 2 more hours, an hour and a half now.
Max, this is it's not a full stack question, but I hope you'll take it anyway. For our tables, should we be including the null? I tried to pull in nullable and it didn't take that, but it did take null. And I'm just wondering if that's just something we know as we're building out in other areas.
Sequelize, if you build your models through them, I believe by default they allow nullable.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the Postgres standard is, but I believe Postgres by default allows nullable if you do not specify when you create the table. Excuse me, when you create the table. So if you do plan on storing, making a field optional basically, and having a null in the database, it's probably a good idea to put in the allow nullable. But I think because the default is allow nullable, all you would need to think about is when you don't want to support a null field.
Okay.
And that's when you would, in your create table statement, add in the not null or is not null.
Okay, I have kind of a draft that I think is wrong that I could share.
Sure.
Unless somebody else wants to go first. Somebody else started talking, so.
I just wanted to tell Max an update that the update to the 5 ran into huge errors and I tried it twice. So then I just ran regular install again to see if it would update, and it did, and it works with 6 for the SAS for some reason.
It is entirely possible that when you were installing your Node SAS 6, you somehow triggered Create React app to update as well. And in the past couple days, it is entirely possible that Create React app updated and now supports Node 6. That's a working theory. That's I'm not saying that it happened that way, but I ran into the exact problem that you did, and fixed it with installing Node 5. And it is entirely possible that when updating Node SAS, it also updated Create React app, and that's why it's working all of a sudden. So, you know, we celebrate different errors. We also celebrate not having any errors. And sometimes you just can't look back. You need to just keep going and go, it's working. That's all that matters. That's how I feel whenever I configure a server. I'm like, I can't tell you how I did it. I just wanted to drink the entire time and it's working now. So don't ask me to do it again. Hence why I am not the teacher teaching the DevOps module. But I'm glad it's working. Thank you for the update. Kyle, go for it. You are muted.
It takes me a while to find the unmute when I'm screen sharing. Okay. So I think I've got the fetch thing. Can't get my own. There we go. So I've got the fetch thing posting the API key like in an object here that most of the other queries that we've done, we've had like a variable going in, but I think I could just put it in quotes like that, create it there. And then here it would be coming in, and then I don't think I need to res.send, like I have to send it to the actual Google, wherever it goes for Google, not back to my own website, right?
Correct. Yeah, you would make because if you send it back to your website, then anyone could realize this call was happening and just steal the API key that way. Probably be a little bit more work for them, but not a lot more work for them. So yeah, what you would have to do is figure out how to move whatever call you were making to Google into your backend, get the resulting data from Google, and then that's what you would res.send back to your front end is the result from Google.
Okay. So where would I look for that? In the actual text of the, like I have it on here without, it just says your API key goes here or something like that. So I can show it.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and pull that up. Yeah, see, this is if they have it set up where you put your key into a script tag in the front end, then Google Maps is set up so that your API key is safe to put in your front end code.
Oh, okay.
Because they are saying, yes, this is an API key, but this is an API key that we have built layers and layers and layers of security around. So even if someone else inspects your code and gets your API key, it's not going to cause you any problems. Doing a dynamic load of a script tag after you get the API key is going to be a little tricky. I'm not sure. So what you would do is pop in remote control. In your Google Directions test, you would basically say const data equals response dot. I'm just going to assume that you're going to send the API key back as JSON. And then you would do something like You're not in React, are you?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Definitely
you-
not in the map test.
You would do a const script equals document dot create element script. Come on. Now you're going to decide to be a pain. Okay, here we go. And then script dot set attribute to your source tag, and then your source tag is actually going to be this whole thing. Oop, wrong one. Except now we're going to use a template literal, and we're going to say key is equal to data.api key. And then we finally have to go to the document, grab the head, and append the child of the script tag. So that's a way to get your API key from the backend, which you had the flow completely right. Then grab that, parse it out as JSON, and then let's work with the DOM. Let's create a element called script. Let's set the script tag into the URL and drop in our API key coming from the backend. And then let's add that to the document. So
And that goes in the head of the document then.
yes, you could use document.body if you prefer.
Okay, yeah. I already have several script things in there anyway, so, well, including that. So I would take that out now, the
Correct.
script with the Google API link or whatever.
Correct. Yeah. So that, I know at some point one of the instructors covered create element, but it's a little trickier for you because normally you would on your back end tell Google, hey, go get whatever data you want, give the data back to my back end, and then I'll pass the resulting data to the front end. But in this case, it's tricky because you actually need the API key on your front end, or none of the maps interaction code will work.
Okay.
So in this case, we say, all right, we're still going to add a layer of security and put the API key in the back end. But in this particular case, because Google is set up the way it is, we kind of need to expose the API key at some point in our front end code.
Right. Well, I will need to use Google Maps on the back end as well, probably for the like the audio directions or
But it probably, like
I
the
don't know.
API key that you use for text to speech or speech to text, that API key will definitely be set up for use only in the back end.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that probably won't be firing through the Google Maps API. That will probably be firing through Google Cloud Language.
Okay.
But this is definitely a layer of security because it is a layer of complexity. So now if someone wanted to scrape your API key and use it somewhere else, even if it wasn't set up right, they would have to look through your code and understand that API key, you were waiting for a response from your backend server. The other kind of interesting thing you could do is you could say, oh crap, I don't want my API key getting sent back anymore, and disable the backend server. And then the front end wouldn't be able to get your API key anymore. So just, I think you're on the right track there.
Okay, thanks.
Question about use effect. Does it always add to import React once you've put it in your JS code with use state? No, you can import it as on a separate line. You always have to import it from React. But in general, it is better to use as few import statements as possible. And so, you could do something like import, I'm going to do it in Slack because I hate typing code in the Zoom chat. import use state from React, and then you could do another import use effects from React. Or I know I'm not sharing my screen. I'm going to send this in 1 second.
Well, I was actually asking because I was putting it in and it automatically put it in my import with use state. And I don't know if that's like a prettier or prettify thing, but I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be separate or if that was typical. Like I typed it in my code and I went to import it and went, oh, it's already there. And I didn't do that.
VS
So I wasn't sure
Code,
that's typical.
yeah, VS Code will auto import things for you. And most of the time it's helpful. And it will typically put it all on the same line in order to try and minimize the number of imports that you're doing. So it is typical to import multiple things from one package if you happen to be using multiple things from the same package. And it is preferred to have it on as few lines as possible, just for the readability of the code. But in terms of in terms of React reading the code, it's not really going to make any difference to React or to really Webpack, which is what's doing all of that importing under the hood. We'll take a break at 7:15, but until then, any questions?
So the thing you just typed, const data equals response.json, I think it needs to be await response.json, right?
You're correct.
And then I guess the other thing is, instead of sending back react.body.api key triple equals, and I had walkumentary key because that was the fake thing that I was sending in the other direction, I should just put my real API key there, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then I'm trying to remember, I know we saw this somewhere, but I had the template literal just said error in it. Will that show like what the error printed out or whatever? Is that going to send out the, I can't remember what the thing is that like the variable is that it automatically calls it.
Not sure.
I'm sorry.
What is
Okay.
it?
I can go back through. I know we had it in some of our other codes, so I'll look for it.
Okay. Yeah, whenever you're using a template literal, you want to make sure that whatever you're putting into the template is a string and not an object. And that may be causing some weird like object showing up in the template literal if you try and dump an object into the curly braces. So that's the only thing that I can think of off the top of my head, but I think that's one of those cases where if you can find where it's going wrong, I'll be like, oh, that's what you meant.
Yeah, it is going to throw an error if it has the wrong thing in there, right? Oh, no, wait, it's just getting, this is kind of a little different than the way I was doing it because it doesn't need to send the right thing anymore.
No, it does. It needs to send your official API key in the res.send.
Send it back, but it doesn't really matter what's coming into the.
Well, if you want to add that,
in the sense of,
if you want to add that layer of security, you could make it do an if statement to check the incoming thing. And then if the incoming thing is right, res.send back the actual key. Otherwise, res.send an error and say, you know, wrong input API key.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I need to think about it a little bit more because I'm not sure that, I mean, there's no reason why it would be different. It's going to be what I have in my website. So it should always work, you know? Yeah.
Right. Other question. 5 minutes until break. We can squeeze at least one more in. At some point, I will create the homework assignment for this weekend. It will largely be get the customers table working, get create and read operations working in the appliance case, and then go wild and just try a couple of things that we tried during classes in the past week. So that will be the homework assignment. Yes. Do you know of any, Mel's question was, do you know of any APIs that do not require your website's URL for approval? There are a lot of them. Some of them are less helpful than others, like the Star Wars API. Star Wars API, great to test with, awesome to get data back from. But most APIs will require you to sign up for an API key. And normally when you get your API key, they'll also ask for the website that you're using. And the reasoning for that is that, one, for security, to make sure that your API key isn't getting used on other websites that it shouldn't be. But two, also, if you start abusing their API, they are able to cut off your access to the API without cutting off everyone's access to the API. So that's the big reason for an API key, is really to track your usage, especially when that usage is tied to a limit or tied to charging you, right? Every time you send an email through SendGrid, or you send a text message through Twilio, or every time you get the weather from the Weather Channel, right? All of those APIs will start charging you per call. So that's why most websites will require an API key in order to use them. Mel, I'm not quite sure what you meant by products to fill e-commerce cards. I'm not too familiar with Amazon Associates. I'm guessing that's a give me a second reading about it. There's nothing off their first page that I just skimmed through. Amazon Associates is like a referral link program. So this is a very common way YouTubers make money, is they recommend a product, and if you buy the product through their specific link that has a referral code as part of a very long URL, that when someone does buy the product, whoever recommended that product gets a little kickback because they drove a sale to the site. So I don't think there's anything preventing you from using Amazon Associates. And the way referral links are set up is you normally don't need to use even use an API. They're going to generate out a link that has your referral code as part of the get parameters. And then whenever someone clicks on that link, it's going to do the right thing on the referral or on Amazon Associates side. So you shouldn't need a API to pull that off, unless you're thinking of something a little bit more complicated or advanced. And then I could talk to that separately. Okay, your product cards in React. So, and when you're saying your product cards, you mean specifically trying to get a database to work to power your product cards. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. So what we would do is you would set up a table in Postgres and a model in SQLize if you happen to be using SQLize. And the table columns would have all the information that your product cards were displaying, right? So an image URL, the name of the product, maybe the price of the product, maybe a description, and then most importantly, the link. And the link would actually be coming from Amazon Associates and would have your referral code built into it, or your associate code or affiliate code or whatever they call it. And then you would create an endpoint to retrieve that product information from your database. And then you would map over the fetch request in your React code or your front end code to use all the information from the database to build out that product card in your HTML. I don't know if that answered your question. Okay, perfect. All right, I said we would break at 7:15. Let's take a break. We'll come back at 7:35, give everyone a 20-minute break, and I'll see you guys in a couple. Start thinking of more questions because we're getting to the point. Like, just start opening my code editor and writing things. Never know where it's going to go from there. So hopefully you guys have questions when I come back. See you at 7:35. All right, we had 2 questions come in from the break. Sorry, while I do believe there is no such thing as multitasking, there is such a thing as rapidly switching between tasks, but that is not something you can really do while you are typing and trying to say something else. One thing to type and write code and explain the code as you're going, totally another thing to be on a different conversation thread. Anyway, I am going to rapid fire through Latonia's question list. Latonia said, are there valid use cases for adding timestamp to all tables in the database? Yes, for sure. And that is why by default, SQLize automatically creates the created at and updated at columns for you. Because more often than not, you will, when you're adding rows to your database, you want the last time it was updated and the last time and the time it was created. So yes, definitely there are use cases for putting timestamp on several tables. There are also times where you're like, you know what, this is a join table, right? Like this is a bridge table. I don't really need to know when the ID from one row got associated with the ID from the other. All I care about is, you know, the time that it got created, not the time that it got created and associated to something else in the database. So bridge tables are probably the easiest example of when we don't need a bunch of timestamp information. But there are also times that you would need a timestamp on a bridge table if you were tracking something like users on service order and you wanted to know when the user had interacted with the service order. So yes, valid use cases for using timestamp all over the place in the database, very common thing to see. The easiest way in Beekeeper, the question was, is there an easy way to see if there are multiples of the same table in Beekeeper? Postgres itself will not let you create multiple tables with the same name. It will just bounce back at you and say a table already exists. So the way you would want to use Beekeeper is hitting the little refresh button next to the word entities. And that would refresh whatever table names that you have in there. But there aren't really, the database won't allow you to have multiple tables with the same name. Now, if one is singular and one is plural, that may be a different case, but for the most part, it won't let you do that. Data type, can data type names be too long? I'm guessing what you mean is the name of the column. Yes. Postgres does have a limit on the length of a column name. It is 63 bytes, which I recognize is not a helpful answer. Oh, it is 63 characters apparently. So you cannot have a column name that is longer than 63 characters, which can cause problems. SQLize actually has an option to deal with that and alias table results. So that gets a little technical, but 63 characters is the limit in Postgres. That may be different across multiple SQL variants. My tables in Beekeeper do not match my components. I have more components. Is that a cause for concern? Absolutely not. I've got 40 some tables in our main database at work and probably 400 components in React. So there does not need to be a one-to-one association. And oftentimes the way you design your data is going to be completely different than the way you display the data in the actual user interface. I think the biggest example of that was like service order had a bunch of columns for date dropped off, date repaired, date approved, date yada, yada, yada. But we chose not to show that on the services orders page. It is possible that you would make different components for that. So you may make a date component that showed all of the dates on that one particular service order. So there is correlation, but not causation between number of components and number of columns or tables in the database. I'm going to read this one out loud as well. I've been drafting my backend and front ends based on my notes, which flows with the do this, then evolve the code to do that, that we've basically been doing in class. Is that a waste of time? Should I jump to the fuller code? I like this process because it helps me better understand. However, ... Great question. If you feel like you can do that process and fully understand the process as you're doing it, that is when you should rely on notes less and jump right into your code. As a junior developer, that won't happen until you start feeling more like a senior developer. When you are confident with your code, when you know what to do from start to finish, that is when you can start relying on your notes less. Until you get to that point, there is no shame in using your notes. There is no shame in doing a planning process. And in a technical interview, even if you can get the code to run right off the bat, as a junior developer, I want to see your thought process. And if you can't explain to me your thought process and explain to me how you're planning to solve this before you jump into the code, that's a major red flag for me. So understanding not just a key thing to get out of the boot camp, but also something that we really want to understand when we're writing our code. There is no shame in planning before we dive into a feature to implement it. And in fact, you have to do that at a project level as well, especially if you're working in a team, of going through project planning, breaking up the feature into different parts, understanding how long it is expected for that to take to implement that, and then taking that project kind of back on your own and breaking that up so you understand it, right? Because oftentimes the way the project manager is going to understand it is different than the way you need to approach it as an engineer or developer. So definitely not a waste of time. Definitely not a waste of time to do that even in the future when you get a job. But at a certain point, you'll start to realize that, hey, I'm not really using these notes, or I can kind of do this on the fly and know what the next steps are without having to explicitly document them. And that's kind of a slow roll off where like you'll be using your notes less and less. But if they are helpful for you, continue to use them, because screw what anyone else thinks or the other systems they use. Everyone has a different thought process when it comes to going after engineering. Latonia, for the other question, should I be concerned I'm still not getting things able to work? Celebrate different errors. We just keep going, but we want to take a moment and say, like, look, more things are working. It's not fully working yet, but I'm making progress even though it doesn't feel like I'm making any progress. So I would not be too concerned if you're stuck anywhere. I would be concerned if you are stuck and have been stuck there for 3 days. So if you reach that point where you're stuck for more than like an hour or two, that's when I would reach out to help, either during the program with a mentor, or going to a supervisor or a team member and asking for help there. That's a big thing that a lot of junior developers struggle with, of knowing when to ask for help and knowing when to say, like, I'm just spinning my wheels here, I'm not making any progress, or like, I keep on doing these Google searches and I feel like it's not helping at all. That's something that you don't want to ask for help. You don't want to look weak or look like you don't understand it, but there are certain concepts that you just can't learn unless you learn them from a senior developer, and stopping and being like, but how do you know that? Like, how did you look at that and solve my problem in 30 seconds? And oftentimes that answer is experience. But when that happens to you, you do want to stop and be like, great, I understand the fix. I understand why that's working. Can you give me a little bit more insight into your experience? Like, is that something you just got over time? Is that something that you got from Stack Overflow? Is there some way that you can explain this concept to me that will make it click a little bit better, right? Like, learning is not a one-way thing, right? Whenever you're learning, whenever you're picking up someone else's experience, you kind of want to have a little pushback on that and be like, that's awesome. Code's working, understand it. Give me a little bit more insight into that. And that's what's really going to move you from entry level to junior to senior. Because if you are not constantly learning at any of those levels, you are not stagnant as a developer, you are falling behind. There are always new things to learn as a developer. I am still looking up things not only on products that I use, but new packages I might want to try, or some new concept that I heard at OpenHack and want to, try and incorporate, or some alternative, or there's a lot going on. So continuing to learn, continuing to ask questions, super important. But I know I start mock interviewing next week, so I won't give away what I think the most important quality is in a developer, because that is one of my interview questions. But something to think about for yourself, of like, what is it that I think in general makes a good developer, and do I have that? Won't expect anyone to answer that unless you're a sucker and signed up for an interview with me. And then in that case, you will be getting that question headed your way. We want to think about what MVP is for our capstone, and then we want to think about what MVPP is, the minimum viable product for presentation, the MVPPP, I guess. Anyway, the employers definitely will go to your GitHub and will take a look at your code. But when you're thinking about graduation coming up in just a little over a month now, we want to start thinking about, how am I going to present this code, and start kind of rounding off some things. Start going like, maybe I should disable this button in the nav, or maybe I should think, I've got 10 different screens. How am I going to present this? And more importantly, what is the story I'm going to present behind this app? Because while the achievement is your app working and some code being out there, what we really want to hear at graduation is like, where were you when you started this program, and what have you learned from the capstone, not necessarily what features did you build into the capstone. And that's a hard thing to do, because you're like, I'm super proud I got this working. Like, I spent hours and hours and hours on this problem, and look, I got it working. And while that is important, what is more important is what you learned along the way, and the kind of the transformation you underwent on that journey. So when you start thinking about what is MVP, it is less about minimum viable product in an actual app that we are going to ship out and go out to production. And for the sake of this class, more of the minimum viable product for presentation. And so starting to think about, I think it's roughly 5 minutes. I'm sure Jesse will provide a lot more details on this as it gets closer. But in 5 minutes, tell me your story through the boot camp where the end result happens to be the capstone. So think of it less of presenting the capstone and more about it presenting your journey through the boot camp where the capstone was the end result. And hopefully that's a way to frame it and think about in the next month, what do I want to finish up on my capstone? Think about what is going to present the best, what is going to show off the widest ranges of skills. And then from there, you don't stop coding on August 26th, right? You always can add more to this. And I know a lot of students, I think Karen to this day is still working on her capstone from cohort 1. Lots of different places you can go from here. Shaw, you had a question about edit by in your table and database. When you say edit by, do you kind of mean updated at with a timestamp, or were you thinking about a different edit by?
Yes, I'm talking about that. So you have a field and someone, a user edits that. So do you create in your table, do you create a row or a field where to capture that and then query and display it on the screen?
Yep. So you can create a column that has a timestamp data type. And then you can also set up that column to automatically update the timestamp whenever an update is run on that particular row. And so that takes care of storing the timestamp. And then, yes, if you wanted to have like a log section of your app where you saw what information was updated most recently, or maybe it's not even a log section. Maybe that's how you choose to sort the table, is based off of what service orders were edited most recently. You could do a sort by that updated at timestamp column, and it would sort based off of what things had been edited most recently.
Thank you.
And no shame in notating everything. I mean, like I said, I keep a notebook right by me and just jot things down all the time. And I think you'll find that's a pretty common thing among developers, of like, our brains switch into a different mode when we're coding. And when we have to come outside of coding, I think some of you guys have picked up on it in Slack. English don't work no good when I'm in coding mode, right? I'll go to write a message and I'll mix up, my twos or an A and an and I'm like, I don't normally do this, like normally my English is right on point. And it's like that part of my brain is just a little bit too far away from the programming part of my brain, and it just doesn't line up. So taking notes, at recognizing that like it is okay to have off day. People get writer's block. Well, you're writing code, so you get writer's block too. There are days that you're just like, can't focus. I don't have ADD, but man, I've got ADD today. And at that point, you start looking at your task list and going, all right, what can I do that isn't in code? Or maybe I can work on some front end tasks so I don't have to think through a new feature, or kind of balancing all of that out. Global git ignore. Yeah, I can go through that. Speaking of taking notes. Sorry, just organizing myself for the second half of class. Carolyn, what conversation in particular, because I'm such a professional talker?
Oh, yeah, that comment was going with your conversation before.
Gotcha.
When you were talking about if you're getting stuck, do you ask help from somebody? Where do you go to figure it out? What do you do? What's your process? And it just kind of organically came up in my conversation with Chrissy today. And she was sharing with me, what she likes to see, which happened to be what I had already told her. So that's a good thing. But that's what that was. I mean, that was a few paragraphs ago now. It was on topic when I submitted it. But.
Oh, no. Good. No. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a legitimate question that gets asked in interviewing, because there are times that I'll have a junior dev on my team and I'll be swamped, and I'll come back to them and go, all right, how's your progress? And they'll go, oh, I've been stuck on this for 4 days. And at that point, you just want to flip your table and you're like, 4 days? Like, at some point in those 4 days, did you think, maybe I shouldn't just be sitting here anymore? Maybe I should be asking that question. But it's a really tough line, because you don't want to be constantly crossing it and constantly asking for help. So it's something that you kind of naturally get into the swing of. And once you are, and you've crossed into that senior developer territory, you start realizing that you need to hone your skills on catching junior developers who are still trying to find where that line is. And checking in and saying, like, hey, even waiting an entire day and being stuck on something and bringing it up the following day, that's too long, right? If a developer can get you unstuck in 5 minutes and you've been stuck on this for 5 hours, you should probably be asking for help at that point.
It's
But
like, it's so easy because that person's done this so much, and then so you save time and you learn from them, and that's why they're there to help you and everything. But another thing too that she brought up that I had already talked about too is that she's not a coder, she's a talent acquisition person. So but she does do a little on the side. But it was about how, well, you go on Slack or whatever, they have a particular company group thing that they go on, and you can ask questions of whoever. And, it helps to tell them what you've tried to do too. You don't just say, I don't want to do that. You say, well, I went to, Stack Overflow, and I looked on the MDN site, and, and Bootstrap, and they had all this great stuff, but it still wasn't like, I still don't know why it's not working. And so, when you need help, if you can articulate, if you can sort of understand what it is you need, even if you don't understand the solution, I think that's helpful to everybody, and will benefit you as a developer on the team. I'm not thinking you're just asking a lot of questions too.
yeah.
Yeah. I learned a lot in that interview. It was great.
Okay. Other than the global git ignore, and Ariel had a question, I think I'm caught up. I'm going to go to Ariel's question next, and then circle back to the global git ignore. Was there anything that someone threw out or had a question about and that I have missed it? Okay. Ariel sent me some code in Slack. And said that she is having some import issue. And I'm totally not stalling because my computer is unzipping the zip file.
So when you get to it, my cards.js, my import cards from React is an issue. And I originally had React -card and that, or cards, and that wasn't it. And I had a hook issue. So now I have import card from React, and I get the error, bear with me, element type is invalid, expected a string or a class, check the render method.
So let me ask this. Where should you be importing cards from?
I thought React.
Are you trying to import the card component from Bootstrap?
No.
Let me get into your code.
All right, it'll be 37 minutes because I zipped the entire file and sent it. The entire capstone is all in that one compressed file, just to make this more difficult.
No,
so,
I got it open already.
All right, so, but here's the thing, regardless of what error I'm getting in, the red type for my actual local host, it still is coming up repeatedly, line 7 index.js for source, react dom.render. So that's where I'm confused because I've never seen that before.
What in the bottom right of your VS Code, does it say JavaScript as the language?
Yes.
then I got nothing for you.
Disheartening. Okay. Thank you.
Let me share my screen. I just got your code pulled up. There's nothing wrong in your index.js at first glance that I can see. So I'm guessing that is VS Code not being configured properly, and telling you there's an error where there isn't an error. With that said, in your cards.js, React doesn't have a card. And so I'm not quite sure why you were trying to import card from React.
I was trying to pull from how the function is in there, like going over the previous videos. So that might be something I don't understand. I was trying to pull, I actually had React's height, whatever, dash card, because that's how I thought I was going to pull it, because I have card down in line 27, I believe. Sorry, I'm looking at two monitors. So that's why I was trying to, but I wouldn't need to, here's my concern. Would I be importing card into cards? Because when I took that out entirely, it told me there was a hook issue. So this is the closest I've gotten to getting my local host to show what I'm looking for.
If we just make that a div, and then remove your import card from React, is there a specific page I have to go to get that to show up in the browser? /cards, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's /cards. However, I have localhost refuse to connect, so maybe you have a better option there.
Yeah, let me open my laptop screen so I'm not blasting you guys with a huge monitor. And figure out how to share that. Okay, so I think the problem that you were having, Ariel, is that you've got your cards component here, and you're properly pulling that in using React Router into your cards here, right? And so cards is properly being imported from this cards file. Now, when we got into cards as a plural, you've got all of this stuff, which is good. But down here, you were trying to pull in a card, but card, I don't know where you were trying to pull that in from. I don't know what card was. And so I just made that a div. And now if you look at your code, you see this popping up.
So I was just trying to name it for the actual, I should have just gone with div and not the full.
Yeah, so
function.
The only time you would call this like card is if you wanted to make your own function const card equals something. Right, like you only are going to name it a different thing if you are going to make that component. So that's why when you were importing card, it was like, what is card? I don't understand what card is. And so it was coming up here and trying to import card from React. And React was like, I don't have a card. You're crazy. Like, I can't import something I don't have. And so what we did is we just came in and said, all right, card isn't going to be a custom component anymore. It's just going to be a regular div. And then in the browser, it shows up fine.
So I just confused it when I was exporting cards into my app. I just confused it with card for the function. So that's why it kept cycling over.
Correct.
Telling me I was stupid. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So you were exporting cards out properly and importing it properly in your app.js and using it properly in your router. I'm sorry, your router down here. So you had all of that right. The only part you confused it at was trying to use a custom component where you hadn't like made that component or defined it anywhere. And because you didn't have it defined anywhere, the import got wonky and was like, what are you trying to import? I don't understand what a card is.
So when am I using a custom component? Because I think that's where my misunderstanding is when I'm actually using a custom.
Yeah, so you could use a custom component if you were like this would be a good use case. You could say something like, I'm just going to comment out your code and kind of hijack it right now. If you wanted to say people .map and get access to your person, which is a perfectly fine thing to do, and then return out a custom component called person that takes a prop of person data and gets access to the person. And then we should also put a key on that as well. So we will say key equals person.name, just because we don't have an ID or a better unique thing to use there. So we got our people looping, and now it's saying person is not defined. Well, I haven't made my person component yet. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to say const person equals, and I'm going to get access to my person data and return out a new function that's going to be a div, and my div is going to have an h1 of the person data dot name. And then they're also going to have some image that shows up, which is going to be my person data dot URL. So now I have made a custom person. No, I am not a parent, but yes, I have created a custom person that is a child component of my cards component. And I am looping over my people array and using my person in here. So what that looks like in the browser is this. Now you could say, Max, that's dumb. Why don't you just take this div and shove it up here? So instead of returning out a custom component, you could return this out and just use person and person. And theoretically, that would work exactly the same. But when you want to move it to a separate component is when you're going to be using that component over and over again. And I would argue that this code is a lot cleaner with having the person down here and actually being able to understand like, hey, you know, this is going to loop over. We're going to have multiple persons from the global people object. So I would say that this is cleaner and it makes sense because you're reusing this component over and over again instead of just dumping the HTML right in the map.
Okay, thank you. That actually makes more sense. Actually, well, the second way you did it made more sense, but I understand what you were doing with the first way.
Cool.
It just, yeah, thank you.
I'm going to copy and paste this to you in Slack just in case you want a reference of this code. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions other than git ignore, which I'm going to have to look up? Okay, let's do it. I'm going to pop open terminal. So kind of a 3-step process for git ignore. First, we have to create the file. So I recommend CDing into a developer folder in your home folder. And if I do a PWD, I can see my developer path there. And then I believe in my developer, I have my LSLA. God only knows what I've got in here. I don't have, oh, I do have my git ignore global in here. So if you don't have a file already set up, that's okay. I'm going to nano into my .git ignore global. And when I do that, I'm going to see I've already got node modules and a DS store file in here. So because I'm in nano, I can hit Control O, which is going to let me write the file. Writing the file is equivalent of saving the file. And if I hit enter, it's going to say that it saved the file. And again, the contents of this file are, it's going to match any part of the past. And if the folder path you're trying to add to Git has node modules in it, it will automatically say, no, we want to just ignore that file in Git. So that's step one. Step two is you need to tell Git, hey, I've got a global Git ignore file. And so in order to do that, what you do is you say, hey, Git, use the config command and set a global to my Git ignore, and this should be in my developer folder. And so if you run that command, which I will copy and paste into Slack in case you need it. I have 3 monitors and I still don't have enough screen space. Okay. If you run that command, it will set it up in Git. Now there is a third command of, okay, what happens if I set up my Git ignore and my node modules are still showing up in Git? You may think, oh, I've got my Git ignore configured improperly, but Git ignores only work from this point forward. So if you have already added your node modules to your repository, Git is going to be like, screw it, I'm still going to track all those files. I don't care if you're telling me to ignore them now. I'm already aware of them, so I can't ignore them. So what you want to do is run a command.
This was, it was not ignoring the files that I created tonight when I created my backend, the node, like when I did npm init, or like the node modules that I created tonight when I installed.
It's still not ignoring those?
No, and I think it's because it's in my capstone folder instead of my class code folder or whatever. Like maybe we put it, I thought it was supposed to be universal though for the whole computer. I don't know.
It is. So when you created your git ignore _ global file, did you put that in the developer folder or did you put that in a project folder?
I'm pretty sure I did it in the developer folder. I couldn't remember what it was called, but it was like a folder that does not show up when you look in the Finder. So it must have been the developer folder, right?
The developer folder will show up, but
It
the
will.
git ignore file in that folder will not show up because it starts with a dot.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's how we did it in class.
And then
But
there's this final
if I
step
do-
where if you need to remove it from a repo that has already had it committed, that is how you tell Git, hey, take node modules out. And if your git ignore is set up properly, node modules won't show up again in your commits.
Okay. I'm doing ls in the developer folder and it's not showing anything in there. So I don't know where we
ls
put it.
space -la. And the LA, I remember, is list all. I'm sure there is a.
Oh, git ignore global. Yeah, it is there. Okay. So then
And
I
if
open it.
you nano your
Nano.
.git ignore global, does it have node modules in there?
Hold on. Has node modules and .ds store, just like we set up in class. Yeah.
And your node modules is spelled right and has an underscore in the
NOD,
middle.
all lowercase NODE _ MODULES. And it was working in my other folder, my classroom code folder, personal code.
So I would try CDing, and you can do it in VS Code, to wherever the folder is that has node modules in it. So
Okay.
not the actual, don't CD into node modules, CD into the folder that has node modules in it.
Okay, let me just, yeah, I think I'm already there, documentary backend. Yeah, okay.
And then go ahead and copy and paste the last thing I put in student pasted code.
Okay.
which is just going to say like, ignore the cache, clean everything out. Like my git ignore is set up, should be set up right. Just clean out node modules.
Okay, the top one,
No, the bottom one.
bottom one. Okay.
Although it wouldn't hurt to run the top one as long as your git ignore global is in your developer folder.
This is fatal path spec node modules did not match any files.
Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
You do run into issues where if you have a Git repo and a Git repo, you can really confuse Git.
And then there's my,
Go ahead and ls.
here?
Yeah. Okay, so the rm command, the git rm didn't run because node modules is properly being ignored. So let's go to the git tab over on the left in VS Code.
How is it properly being ignored? It's not, it's green.
Yeah, I know. Go to the git tab in VS Code.
The git tab. This?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then can you drag out your sidebar just so I can see a little bit more?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
And this is the other one I want to ignore. That's probably simpler to do though.
Try running the other command I put in Slack. Maybe the git ignore never got set right. Meanwhile, my annotation bar disappeared and now I can't uncircle on your screen. Sorry about that.
That's okay. All right. I can't really see what it did because it's so shrunk in there. Oh, it's no, it's
So quit out of your VS Code and pop it back open.
okay.
Notice how many file changes you have.
Oh, yeah, it's I can't see because it's circled, but I can see that this is grayed out now. Good. Okay.
So it
That was
was you had your git ignore set up properly, but you didn't tell git to use the git ignore global file. And so that's why there was that disconnect. And when you reran that command, it looked at your git ignore, and then we had to just tell VS Code like, hey, quit out, refresh. Now look, git is telling you to ignore those files, and that's why it updated.
Okay. And why did it work in my other projects and not in my capstone? That's the weird thing.
Maybe you had a local git ignore file, like when you create React app, automatically creates a project level git ignore file that ignores node modules for you.
Maybe,
so it is,
yeah, I don't know.
it is possible, like I've run into that a lot when I'm copying code from my code into the classroom repo. I always have to delete the git repo that create React app creates for me because I'm storing it in a different git repo, like a git repo in a git repo, and that's what causes problems. If you stop sharing your screen, the circle should go away. That is,
yeah. So then I just add here, I just have to add the name. There's no file path, right? So I just put API keys and that's the name of the folder. So it should work.
yeah, but you probably want to do that at a git ignore file inside your repo.
Oh,
right? Because
okay.
that's like a project level git ignore, and it will merge your project level and global git ignores together.
Okay.
So you probably already have a git ignore over in the sidebar somewhere. And if you pop that open, you can add your API key to the end of that list.
Okay. All right.
And yes, you would just use the file name. You don't need a path or anything like that.
That was really weird because my local Getignore files weren't working until we did the global one, the local ones for the node modules. I mean, so I feel like it was the global one that worked, but for some reason it wasn't doing it. In that
We
folder.
may have cleaned out some gunk in there. And because
Yeah.
it was failing globally, it wasn't like respecting the project Gitignore files.
Maybe.
But there are times where I just go, I can't tell you why. It's working now though.
At least it works now. Thank you.
There is a ghost in the machine, and while I don't believe that this is quite ghost in the machine level, it's like way past my understanding of how Git works under the hood to even attempt an explanation. All right, we've got 7 minutes left. We have been busting through questions left and right. I am cool letting you guys off the hook a couple minutes early unless there are other questions, and at which point I'm happy to answer them. That invitation to let you guys off early really made that question list empty up, didn't it?
I had a question. It's kind of not related though.
Yeah.
So is your Rubik's Cube melting, or is it
It
like
is.
falling into water? It's melting?
It's melting into a puddle.
Why?
It's I think my brother actually got this shirt for me, but yeah, I don't know that I have very many non-nerdy shirts in my closet. Most of them are Hack Upstate shirts, but I edit Wikipedia, and I've got a shirt that I got when I bought my first Mac in 2007. And now it's like a collector's item. So I walk into like the Apple store and they're all like, whoa, nice shirt. Like, shirt's 15 years old. But it is not, well, no, it's not 3D. It's just kind of printed on there. It's probably just the light that's making it look weird. I've got a huge ring light over me, which you can probably catch in my glasses reflection. And while it's normally not noticeable when the rest of my room gets dark, the ring light really lights me up the most, and then it does weird things in the virtual background. So yes, I am a lighting nerd. I am an AV nerd. I am wearing a stage headset, which is why my microphone is so clear. I don't know if you can pick it up when I turn my head, but it goes over both ears. I've got an in-ear feedback, which I think you guys have seen me. It's the clear tube. And that's why you don't ever see anything in my ears, is because I'm literally wearing what like news anchors wear to get feedback from their producers. Yes, I am weird, but you guys have survived not only so many weeks with me, but 5 consecutive weeks. We made it through together. I am a little less sane than when I started. I admire you guys so much for being able to do a 26-week program. I'm telling you, I don't know that I would have a 6-week in me. So it is good that you guys are getting another instructor, and I admire you guys so much for being able to push through and be able to do this night after night, week after week. It is truly impressive. I will not truly be gone. I'm still available for one-on-ones. I will probably be less helpful in one-on-ones for the upcoming modules on DevOps and security and that kind of stuff. I can certainly give it a valiant effort if you have questions on those homework assignments, or stuck somewhere, or just need something explained to you a little differently. This was the last week with me entirely. I am not the lead instructor for any more weeks. I am not signed up to TA at all. I am still around for one-on-ones. I am in the mock interview schedule. So if you would like me to make you cry in an interview, feel free to sign up with a mock interview over there. I promise it will be an experience. I can't promise it will be a good experience, but I promise it will be an experience to interview with me. So I will be around for one-on-ones. I will be around for mock interviews. And I will get the homework posted up tomorrow for this weekend assignment and get you guys feedback on anything that I owe you over in Google Classroom. Yes, my feelings will be deeply hurt, Latonia, if you cancel an interview with me. And then I will be back for the final week of class when it's all hands on deck and help with the capstones. Obviously, if you have questions or have been working with me on your capstone, feel free to continue to schedule one-on-ones. But this is it. We made it to the end. You've survived all of my rambling, and you are on to the next module and instructors. All right. Well, I will see you guys. Oh, we do have office hours tomorrow at 6:30. If I've already answered questions, do not feel obligated to come to them. Office hours are always optional. It's not like we're going to mark you off for attendance or anything. So if you just want to work or skip it, that's completely fine. But I will be online at 6:30 tomorrow for any questions you guys may have.